Hello, I'm Dr. Joe Arminio. Welcome to my channel, America Resurgent. As I prepare this video, this unconscionable Iran war continues to rage on. I'm going to argue in this video that U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham is goading President Trump into doing his worst in the Middle East. What do I mean by doing his worst? That he would continue this bankrupt neocon foreign policy, about which I will have more to say in a moment, and also would continue to bankroll, backstop, and give a free hand to this greater Israel that seems to be rolling out across the region at the expense of the Arabs in the region. Moreover, that we would press on with this regime change in Iran, bringing about or revisiting an earlier neo-colonial project of the period 1953 to 1979. So what do I mean by a neocon policy? Well, this is a policy that dates back to the 1970s. It's about maintaining the little discussed but vitally important petrodollar system, maintain it by force. The petrodollar system came about in the 1970s. The idea is that oil-producing countries such as Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia will sell their oil exclusively or nearly exclusively in U.S. dollars, and then will invest their profits in the U.S. economy, which benefits American financial elite immensely and the common American to some extent, though he's more likely to find his son or daughter dying in a distant place. So the neocon element, well, by the 1990s, we were abusing this petrodollar system. So the neocons come along, and by the then President George W. Bush's administration in the early 2000s, they're a force to be reckoned with in government. President Bush will overthrow Saddam Hussein in 2003 to maintain the petrodollar system. A petro-euro system is emerging. This is to cut off that rival to the petrodollar system. Well, now the neocons are doing it again vis-a-vis Iran. They want to keep Iran from going too deeply adrift, entering into a rival BRICS financial system. And this idea of neocolonialism, well, that goes back to the idea of an empire, an unsavory thought for Americans, that instead of having the imperial metropole send out its administrators to some distant colony to rule it, here you have the natives in a supposed independent state, but really a client state, ruling on your behalf. And on occasion, your own armed forces may have to come into the neighborhood. And the neocons want these armed forces to come into the neighborhood a lot and think it necessary. Now, why do I believe that Senator Graham is goading the president into doing his worst? Well, I rely especially upon the remarks he gave on the Senate floor on March 4 in defense of the president's Iran war. And I'm going to give you or share with you here a clip of Senator Graham's remarks, and take a look at the three propositions. These are central to his belief that we've got to do what he wants the president to do. And what are they? That Iran is the number one state sponsor of terror. It's not so. That Ayatollah, the supreme Iranian leader, is a religious Nazi, doesn't hold up, and that Israel is a wonderful partner of the United States. Well, it's an ally, and we hope it does well, but some partner.
The enemy that we're facing, Iran, is the largest state sponsor of terrorism on the planet. They have been killing Americans by the thousands since 1979. After months of trying to negotiate an outcome to avoid conflict, it was clear during those negotiations that Iran is wedded to its agenda. The Ayatollah is a religious Nazi. He's no more likely to give up his agenda than Hitler was. There's no better partner on the planet than Israel. You talk about Gaza, innocent Palestinians being killed. I think Israel had to do what they had to do.
So I first want to talk about this claim that Iran is the number one state sponsor of terror. Is it really? And I'm going to be referring you to a very important source, and this individual is former CIA analyst, secretary, a member of the Department of State, very accomplished individual who draws upon well-substantiated primary sources to make his case that Israel is not the number one sponsor of terrorism. So let's begin with Iran. And by the way, how do we define terrorism? Well, we define it as, Mr. Netanyahu's given us the definition, it is the killing of civilians by military force for political purposes. So by that definition, we find out that Iran itself has killed 0 U.S. civilians since the Mullah came into power in 1979. That approximately, or no more than 100 U.S. civilians have been killed by Iranian proxies, such as Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthi. And that in terms of U.S. military losses, these would be legitimate war operations, that Iran's proxies have killed about 1,000 U.S. servicemen. So this is the number one sponsor of terror, supposedly. But I think not. And I think this is an attempt to exaggerate the threat so that we would continue to apply pressure to Iran. Now let's take a look by contrast at what the United States has accomplished in the area of killing civilians by military force for political purposes. In the 1980s, we supported Saddam Hussein's Iraq's war against Iran in a variety of ways. And Saddam Hussein killed approximately 500,000 Iranian civilians. So that's on our conscience. We also find that in the Iraq war from 2003 to 2011, that we killed 200,000 Iraqi civilians. And then in Afghanistan, well, the numbers show about 50,000 dying directly, maybe another 50,000 dying indirectly from actions of our military forces. And then let's take a look at our ally Israel. By my estimates, and drawing upon primary sources and so forth, I believe that 250,000 civilians have been killed by the Israeli Defense Force since October 8, 2023. Remember, October 7 of that year is the infamous Hamas attack on Israelis, mostly innocents, in which they will kill 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians. Well, the IDF's response has also destroyed more than half of all buildings in Gaza, and most of the Gaza Palestinians are living in tents as I speak. And then there's this new Gaza. Well, what is that? Well, we hear about the Board of Peace managing this AI smart city. Well, this smart city is another name for a 15-minute city, and there is plenty of evidence, including testimony, to make us suspect that this would amount to a digital prison. So I ask again, is Iran the number one sponsor of terror? I think not. Now, let's come down to the sources. So for the sources, the numbers where Iran and the United States is concerned, I turn to this very accomplished analyst, Larry Johnson, and there's this article, Iran does not hate Americans, but it has legitimate reasons to do so. And it appeared in RAD Patriot, January 14, 2026. And then for what Israel has done to civilians, I would refer you to 2 recent videos of mine. Here is one of them, is Netanyahu sabotaging peace? Can the Palestinians be trusted? And the other, did he commit genocide? So now these other 2 propositions of Senator Graham. Israel is a wonderful partner. Ayatollah is a Hitler. Well, the first one, Israel is a wonderful partner, I think we can dispense with very quickly. Look at their behavior in the Gaza Strip. In terms of Ayatollah being a Hitler, well, this is going to take a bit more examination. So I'm going to give you this chart comparing Nazi Germany to theocratic Iran. So at first we see there's a definite similarity, radical ideologies on both sides. Then we also see another similarity, but it doesn't seem to make them as dire a threat, though, as the senator would want us to believe. In the case of the Germans, the German people constitute a small part of the European peoples. In the case of Iran, the Shia, which is the sect of Islam that they practice, that is a small subset of all of Islam. However, in the case of Nazi Germany, they were able to overcome this limitation that they constitute a small subset of Europe, And they did, in fact, pose an imminent threat. Well, why? Well, for one, they had a conquering force. They had a war machine that could cover the ground and seize ground very rapidly. Air power was a very crucial component to that. And secondly, the terrain around Germany was suitable for their war machine to operate in. How about in the case of Iran? Not posing an imminent threat. Well, why not? Well, for one thing, they don't have a conquering force. They have a punitive force. Missiles and drones primarily. It's good to inflict harm, but not for seizing territory. Also, the terrain around Iran is not suitable for extensive military conquest. Why? Well, beyond Iran, there is a sizable Shia population in southern Iraq. But once you take that, from there, the terrain hems you in, the desert on all sides. It's not suitable for conquest. Now, there are pockets of Shia practicing Muslims littered about the rest of the Middle East, for instance, in Lebanon or Yemen. But again, these are pockets, and they can be cut off. They can be induced to wither on the vine, if you will. And what is the crucial component of that? If Israel will only behave itself, these pockets of Shia proxies will not be the force that they are presently. Another reason why you have an imminent threat in the one hand but not in the other is the economies. Economies are very different. In the case of Germany, Nazi Germany, the economy is in a very desperate shape. They have to seize land. They're a predator economy. They're a coiled spring. They must release that spring or perish. Not so in the case of theocratic Iran. After all, they've been in power since 1979. Not the same sense of urgency. And moreover, their religion, their ideology is ancient. I mean, it goes back 1,500 years or more. Yes, there is this idea of a Mahdi, something about an eschatological end times imperative, but not to the same sense of urgency as Nazi Germany. But here's other important differences, which is that in the case of Nazi Germany, there was no liberal opposition for Hitler really to deal with. In the case of theocratic Iran, there is a sizable liberal opposition. And by the way, that opposition came to the fore in 2015 when a very important nuclear accord was agreed upon. Now, speaking of that nuclear accord, well, in the case of now, let's talk now about whether or not they can be dealt with. You can negotiate with them. Well, in the case of Nazi Germany, we know you couldn't negotiate with Hitler. He broke every single agreement that he entered into. In fact, as soon as the ink was dry, he was stabbing you in the back. Not the case of theocratic Iran. They enter into this accord, this joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. It's a nuclear accord in 2015 between the Obama administration and Iran. It also involved our European allies, Russia and Red China. They maintained this. Iran remained in compliance right through for the first 3 years, from 2015 to 2018, when Mr. Trump said he wants to do better. Well, he pulls out of the accord, and yet Iran still continued to abide by the accord for another year. This according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. And by the way, in the first 3 years, Mr. Netanyahu, who's then prime minister as he is now, cannot find a single violation that Iran has committed to the JCPOA. And yet he's telling Mr. Trump that the United States should pull out of the accord. So there is a record of them entering into arrangements, into keeping their word, whereas with Nazi Germany there isn't. So all things considered, I'm sorry, the Ayatollah in my mind is not a religious Nazi. But that said, what is the situation that Mr. Trump inherits in 2025? Well, partly the situation, or a good part of it, is of his own doing. When he comes into office, he's facing an Iran, this according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, that has enough enriched uranium to create between 7 and 10 crude nuclear bombs. What are we going to do about that? Well, why'd that come about? Because Mr. Trump pulled out of the nuclear accord. He pulls out in 2018. He reapplies sanctions. This embarrasses the liberal elements within Iran who'd pushed the nuclear accord. It strengthens the hardliners. The hardliners say now we must retaliate for this withdrawal from the accord by the United States. But interestingly, they do not actually assemble nuclear bombs. Why not? Because they want to strengthen their bargaining position. And remember, they have entered into a bargain with us before. So what do you do, though, in the face of Iran, which is on the verge of acquiring nuclear weapons? Well, I think you need to see this thing in context. What you do is you contain Iran. So if Iran is not equivalent to a religious Nazi, what is it equivalent to? Well, I would suggest equivalent to the Soviet Union, though on a much smaller scale, much smaller. In the case of the Soviet Union, here the Communist Party of the Soviet Union is dedicated to the destruction of the West, of capitalism, just as Iran is dedicated to the destruction of Israel, and yet we were able to contain the Soviets. And of course, as we know, the Soviets would come into the possession of nuclear weaponry. Speaking of nuclear weaponry, what does Mr. Trump do in his second term? Does he use force or does he resort to diplomacy? I would suggest diplomacy. And if that fails, then you rely upon your armed deterrent, as we had done quite successfully for a very long time with the Soviet Union. So instead, that is not what's being done, and Mr. Trump is heeding the call of Senator Graham. And now, beyond containing Iran, what else need you do? You certainly have to reform the situation behind the front lines facing Iran. You've got to get Israel to behave. You've got to get them to promote a two-state solution. And then most importantly of all, you've got to get away from this petrodollar system. It's time for deep, serious currency and bank reform in our country before it's too late. That's the most important thing that we need to do. Once we do that, we will not have to throw our weight around the world to the same degree as we are now. We'll still have to maintain an adequate defense, but we will not have to be the militaristic, interventionary power that we have become. So much for the neocons, we don't need them. And we can share more of our ingenuity, of our wealth with the rest of the world, which would include Iran. And eventually, I believe Iran will come around and rid itself of its radical ideology as it had done prior to 1979. Well, that concludes what I have to say about the Iran war, about Senator Graham in particular. Please engage with me in this discourse. Let us elevate the political discourse. Let us work together. And let's get out of this war and do things right vis-a-vis Iran and the Middle East as a whole.